Let's do a quick update while I get ready to record Napoli-Atalanta, which will start soon, with some thoughts on Conte's technical, tactical, and lineup changes. I'm really intrigued. What happened this afternoon? Chapeau to Bologna, hats off, congratulations. As I'm speaking, Bologna is at the top of the table, even if they're sharing the lead, and they'll stay there until at least until 4:30 p.m. tomorrow or 4:15 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Then Roma will play, then there will be the derby, but it's like a computer. Turn on the computer, the files of Vincenzo Italiano, who leaves the job to his assistant and changes little, who changes five or six players and it changes little, who changes three or four and it changes little in the sense that it changes little from the starting point, and that's fine. But then the performance is always incredible. It's a team that plays by heart. How far can Bologna go? Anywhere. I wouldn't set any limits because when you play like this, you make the most of almost every member of the squad. Sometimes it's Bega, Fabian, then Castro scores, and of course Orsolini scores, which can happen to anyone. The setback of missing a penalty, there are those who sit on the bench to think about the next match. A squad built by Sartori, who, along with Italiano, I believe is truly the main architect. Chapeau. I don't know how far Bologna can go, but if they keep playing like this, they can even compete for a Champions League spot. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. In Cagliari Genoa, something truly rare happened. A mistake by Caprile, whom I really respect. A mistake can happen. We all make them. He does too. It was a serious error that probably cost Cagliari the 3 points that at that moment in the match, to avoid mincing words, those 3 points were materializing for them if it hadn't been for that mistake. Then Cagliari also had a bit of a wobble, but honestly, they conceded both goals in a rather silly way. That said, De Rossi is making an effort to give the new Genoa a different mentality compared to the previous management. And then there's Juventus. Let me ask you, has Spalletti arrived yet? Because I have the feeling that Spalletti still hasn't arrived, that it's Tudor sitting on the bench. With a different posture, a different profile, and fewer hairs compared to all the hair that Spalletti no longer has. But jokes aside, honestly, regardless of the result, which in the end makes the difference in the commentary, let's pretend that the result, yet another draw, the third in 4 games under Spalletti, didn't actually happen. I don't see any sign of it, and I say this as someone who appreciates Spalletti, so it's not a criticism, just an observation. He probably missed the train and will catch up later, and tomorrow or the day after, we'll hear the news of Spalletti replacing Tudor. To me, it seemed like the same old Juve as always. A slow Juve, a predictable Juve, a Juve incapable of, and, with all due respect to Fiorentina's squad, they were playing against the team at the bottom of the table. And I'll talk about Fiorentina as well. The first half was deadly boring in terms of what Juve should have done but didn't. Let's not even talk about the incidents, but what matters to me is the concept of the team. And there is no team concept. Maybe it's only been a short time, but now that short time isn't so short anymore. The positives are very few. Yes, there's Kostic's goal that broke the deadlock, but Vlahovic, and I'll also talk about the penalty, which by now is his main contribution from July and August, because honestly, I have something to say about the substitutions as well, and I'll explain why. But the first half was played with Ildiz being non existent, with no clear points of reference, with a lineup that mostly just tried to keep possession at times, but they could have conceded a goal too, because there was that big chance. I'll get to the topic of Ken and Fiorentina, but I don't see any substance. As they say in Rome, there's no real meat to it. I see a lot of smoke, I see a slow team, there's no change of pace. By now, with Coop Miners in the back three, even the effect from the first two matches has worn off. When he used to do something interesting, today he's basically just there like any other defender, as they call them nowadays. But I don't need him used that way. If you score a goal, the approach in the second half is deadly in a negative, ugly way. A ball was lost in a really careless way. Now, I haven't rewatched the play, so I could be wrong. Maybe Thuram lost the ball in a silly way, but Mandragora scored a great goal. Truly fantastic. But it was a lapse in focus at the start. I hope I'm not mistaken about who made that error that allowed Mandragora to get the ball, and Mandragora then scored an extraordinary, beautiful goal, which is part of his technical skill, his always impressive shooting ability. But I'll be honest. The wrong approach, an anonymous first half. You only had that one chance with Vlahovic, and I'll talk about the penalty separately, plus a few other sporadic situations that you didn't take advantage of, but it was far too little. I expect a different Juventus. I've tried to say, and I really believe it, that Spalletti's Juve will rack up a lot of points. And I mean it, even with all the gaps in the squad, at least among the starting 11, especially one or two positions in particular. But that's what I think. And I have to emphasize this point, but not like this, because Tudor is still there and it's still the same old Juventus, nothing has changed. In the second half, Ildiz was a bit better, but only a little, not much, with a few initiatives, and the feeling was that you just had to wait for another moment of brilliance from Vlahovic, a flash from Vlahovic, a play by Vlahovic. There was a header from McKennie, but it was far too little. Far too little because after conceding the equalizer, there was a gut reaction for 3 or 4 minutes. But I expect a team, a real team concept, a team that can concede a goal but still needs to handle the situation with a different kind of sharpness. This is a team that leans on and relies on individual plays, whereas I would have expected a Spalletti style idea, which still isn't there. It will take time. But now, the overall picture is starting to look like an acute case of droitis, with strong symptoms of persistent drawitis, meaning it's recurring. Only one win in Cremona in the debut, the comeback draw with Sporting, the nil-nil with Torino, today's 1-1 despite taking the lead. There are too many of these and too few signs of the new era. About the penalty, I'll tell you what I think and then I'll also give you my take on Fiorentina. A penalty is when referee Doveri gives it, end of story. Let's go back to the usual concept. He gave it, it's a matter for the pitch, end of story. For me, that penalty had to be given. You might have a different opinion, but we can all have our own view. At that point, VAR shouldn't intervene. Whether he gives it or not, he shouldn't be called to the VAR. I'm sorry that Doveri, who is no longer at the start of his career, was there but then wasn't, and ended up being blatantly overruled by the VAR in the penalty area. That's also something that for me isn't really acceptable. Vanoli's new Fiorentina has now drawn for the second time in a row, from the 2-2 at Marassi to today's 1-1 with Genoa. This draw doesn't really help, especially since Fiorentina's upcoming fixtures are anything but easy. But there was a bit of heart, a reaction. You can see Vanoli's touch. The team is more fired up, less sluggish, less predictable. Here you can tell that Pioli left and Vanoli arrived, whereas over there it's not clear that Tudor left and Spalletti came in. In other words, there is something different here. You might say it's only been 4 matches and it's too soon to judge. But I expect something more. And I also believe that Spalletti can't be satisfied. Let me know when Spalletti actually arrives. They need to get out of this position in the standings as soon as possible because it's honestly crazy in the opposite sense. It's madness to think they're down there. I don't know if this can be a small step forward, but they need to win because with draws these days, you get nowhere. I'll leave you to the match if you're watching this video more or less in real time, and we'll definitely see each other afterwards. Bye.